guy that I got who's going to be the guest on episode 150 next week is the guitar player on tour with Billy Joel.
Nice. Oh, wow. Billy Joel is an amazing artist, one of my favorites out there. And so what's his name?
His name is Mike Delguidice, and he has a real interesting story, which I actually found in Rolling Stone magazine. And as I read this article, I thought, this guy personifies what my listeners of the podcast are striving for. You know, I always gear my show towards the up-and-comers who are trying to learn from my guests each week. And here's a guy that, you know, was doing the same thing, was doing the daily grind on Long Island, and started this Billy Joel tribute band called the Big Shot Tribute Band. And he was having a lot of success with it and really built it up and was playing around Long Island. And make a long story short, is to the point now where he's on tour with Billy and plays guitar and sings with Billy Joel. But his one and only quote-unquote demand to Billy Joel was, I got to still be able to do Big Shot. Because he's been doing the Big Shot Tribute Band for like 20 years. And
this sounds like the storyline of Rockstar.
Yes, I love that movie.
And
my favorite.
And Billy Joel said, "That's fine, man. I totally get it. You know, I understand." So Mike, and he was saying on the podcast that'll come out next Wednesday that he plays with Billy Joel. He does his Big Shot Tribute Band, and he kind of has his own like third band where they just go out and they only perform Mike's own original songs. And he also just got one of his songs placed as the theme song for a new CBS sitcom starring Kevin James that's coming out. So real interesting discussion. I was really happy to get the opportunity to talk to him. And, you know, he was so down to earth, and you get someone like that as a guest and you say, oh, this person's probably going to give me, 20 minutes if I'm lucky. And my show is at least 45 minutes. Well, he just had no time constraints at all. We talked for 63 minutes. So it was a really great interview.
I'm sure you had a lot of information and information that you would want out of him, especially someone like that. That's like I said, like just like the Rockstar movie, someone that actually they have a tribute band in a sense to someone that they idolize, and then it turns out you now are playing.
Where was he found?
How
did he get found on YouTube, or how did Billy Joel find him? I didn't catch that.
No, the Big Shot Tribute Band is what really kind of put him on the radar.
But I mean, how did Billy Joel? Did they find him on YouTube? Because I think that's how a lot of people are getting found these days. I think
over so many years, they just know that you're performing, right?
Well, I honestly don't remember, and quite frankly, I told the listeners as I was recording the show the other day, I'm not going to have Mike retell the whole story. Go read it in Rolling Stone, because even though it's quote unquote someone of that level, I still want to accomplish what I want to accomplish every week, which is, listen, buddy, I'm going to pull information out of you that's going to help my listeners, because they're all going to want to know, hey, this is possible. I can do my own thing with an eye on maybe someday I reach this kind of level. So I was still asking
we'll have
him
to listen
those.
To the podcast.
Yeah, I think that's how the new singer, well, he's not new anymore. The latest singer for Journey was found. He was found on YouTube, and he sounds just like Steve Perry, by the way. But he's been singing now for like 10 years.
Yeah, and Mike referred to him during our interview. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So tell us, specifically about the podcast. Who's it catered to? What's it about?
Well, every week I interview a guest that's having success in the entertainment business. I like to really get people's attention by saying I've had guests on who've been on American Idol, who've been on The Voice, who've been on America's Got Talent. I had a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, a Grammy Award winner, a Las Vegas headliner. I had the lead guitar player for Garth Brooks, and now I'm going to start telling people and for Billy Joel. But, those are kind of the sexy ones that gets people's attention. In other words, I'm not interviewing Bruce Springsteen. I'm not interviewing John Bon Jovi, Katy Perry, people like that, because I'm interviewing people that are having success in the entertainment business, but at a level that the listeners can kind of relate to and say, okay, I can do that, and so I'll ask my guests, how did you get your songs placed in film and television? How are you getting booked at some better venues now? How did you just entirely fund your newest album through a crowdfunding campaign? Because I know that these are the questions
that your listeners have.
Yeah, and that they want to know, well, wait a minute, don't just say, I did X, Y, Z. Tell me how you did it. And so I've been delivering that show on time every week for what'll be 3 years as of February.
And 150.
150 episodes. And what really excites me also is that I'm up to 124 countries around the world where my show has gotten listeners from. It amazes me. I was talking to Jim Florentine. He's a well-known comedian. He's also on That Metal Show on VH1. And I told Jim, that I'm a podcaster too, and that I listen to his show. Mm-hmm. And he said, he kind of looked at me and he says, isn't it amazing, man? Like, all of a sudden you find out that there's like some dude in Sweden that's listening to you. And I'm like, exactly. I look at my data that I get in like you do, Jamie, and you see Saudi Arabia on there, you see these countries where you go, somebody in that country cares, and that really motivates you to keep doing your show. You say, wow, somebody down in insert country here took the time out to listen to my show.
That's the beauty of podcasting, is it's specific information available on demand on a variety of, there's so many different topics, and what you think is needed in, your hometown or something, it may not be, it could be needed overseas, for instance.
That metal show, that's the one you like, right?
Yeah, that's actually where that business show name came from.
Really?
I was watching
Wow.
Yeah, I was watching that metal show.
That.
Yeah,
it's a small world after all, as they say, an hour to the east of us in Orlando.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I was watching. It was at the time when I was doing the planning for the radio show, and I was like, I need a name, and I was sitting there watching that metal show, and I was like,
That's
just call it
it.
That business show. That's literally where the name came from. That's I was watching that program.
Well, the thing about podcasting too is it's really great. And I do look at a lot of the research that's published, on the increasing numbers of people that are consuming podcasts, people that are listening to it. And it's so accessible because if you walk for fitness, if you spend a lot of time in your car, that's usually when I'm listening to podcasts. If you relax at the beach, if you work out, if you travel by plane a lot, these are all great opportunities, great times to listen to a podcast. So I love that people can get it. And, you're talking about all the different platforms. I mean, I want people to go to NHTE.net. It stands for Now Hear This Entertainment. And at NHTE.net, I have all the episodes there, so you can listen to it right there on the site. But I've also got icons that people can click on to go to iTunes, to Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud. I probably need to add an icon because I know that my show is also on TuneIn Radio. But I love that it's that accessible that people can get it from so many different places and then listen to it in all these different applications, all these different settings that I just listed.
Chris shared a great statistic yesterday about the growth of the podcasting movement. In 2005, 10% of the public had said that they had listened to a podcast, and it consistently had grown. The statistic is at 37% right now, and so it's got a lot of room to grow in terms of reach out there. And so a lot of people are still finding out what a podcast is, how to listen to them. There's probably people right now that are listening. They're probably saying, "What is a podcast? What is this?"
Exactly.
I didn't know what a podcast was, several years ago. And so, for people that are not familiar with, podcasts, just briefly tell them, what it is. How do they find these shows?
Well, it's primarily done through audio, although a video podcast is out there as well. Chris does this thing at the Florida Podcasters Association meeting every month where he reads what the definition is, and it's anything that's an EPUB file that's published on a consistent basis. So in my case, it's an audio file. Like I said, it could be video, it could be something else, but primarily that's what people think of is primarily audio and maybe video. And, you've got shows. We've got one person in the Florida Podcasters Association. Hers is 5 minutes long. Mine is 45 to 60 minutes long, depending on how hearty a discussion I'm having with the guest. And mine comes out once a week, but you've got people like John Lee Dumas who are doing a podcast every single day. And they cover a wide variety of topics. And that's one thing that people talk about is if you can find the niche where there's not a podcast being done or very few, jump right in because the time is still now to dive into podcasting. And, probably when we come back from the break, we can talk about the doors that doing a podcast will open that I have certainly found in my close to 3 years doing my show.
Yeah, absolutely. He mentioned John Lee Dumas, a tremendous success story. He was just a regular working man, a financial advisor out of San Diego, and he started Entrepreneur on Fire about 3 years ago. And in 3 years, he's made $9 million. And I met him down in Puerto Rico. And he does essentially what I do on the program here each and every morning, just interviews entrepreneurs, asks them like the same 10 or 12 questions, too. It's a very predictable interview that he does each and every day on his podcast. But he's a tremendous success story. And there's a lot of those people out there. And there's a lot of industries and topics where people, where there's a demand for this type of information. You can be very, very niche, very specific. Like yesterday at the podcasting workshop, we heard from a guy who has the colon cancer podcast, spoke to his experience with colon cancer, how he talks with caregivers, other people that are being afflicted with the disease, and how he's gotten sponsorships and a lot of reach and has helped out a lot of people through the colon cancer podcast. And so a lot of opportunities with podcasting.
think sometimes you may think your subject is too narrow or not big enough, but you'd be amazed. There are so many people that can relate to you, no matter how micro niched you think you are. There are people that can relate to you, and that just makes you more specific. So the more micro niche, the better.
Absolutely. And again, currently talking to Bruce Wawrzyniak, founder and president of Now Hear This Entertainment. Learn more about this, nowhearthis.biz. You're listening to That Business Show with Jamie and Kelly, where business becomes show business.
You're listening to That Business Show with Jamie and Kelly on 1250 WHNZ WHNZ. Missed a show? Then head over to TampaBayRadio.com, where all shows are available on demand. Once again, here are your hosts, Jamie and Kelly.
And welcome back to That Business Show with Jamie and Kelly, where business becomes show business. Talking about podcasting with Bruce Wawrzyniak, founder and president of Now Hear This Entertainment. Learn more at that website, nowhearthis.biz. And Bruce, you're mentioning, the doors that podcasting can open, in your business. What has it done?
Well, so you have to keep in mind that as much as we're talking about my podcast, the core of my business is actually management, promotion, and booking of entertainers. So, that's the spinoff. That's why when I first launched it, I thought, hey, this will just be a cool marketing tool for my business. I didn't know that it was going to turn into what it is today. But I have always had this opinion, and I'm sure you do too, that there's no such thing as having too many contacts.
Right.
And so to me, every week when I do my podcast, I am now making a new contact because all of a sudden I'm building a relationship with that guest. In fact, when I travel or if someone's coming through Tampa and there's an opportunity to meet someone who's been on my show that I probably only did the interview with via Skype audio, well, now I want to meet that person and sit down and have breakfast or have lunch and maintain the contact, but also I want to get a photo with them so that I have social media content. And what that does is it gives me an opportunity to plug a past episode of the show because people will see that picture on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, whatever, and I'll say, Bruce Wawrzyniak with Kelly Wilson, who was the guest on episode such and such, and you give the link and they do that. But, a cool example is, so one of my clients, she's a singer-songwriter in Austin, Texas, and I was contacted by a company that was doing a major event, and they wanted her. She was very much on the radar. Oh, we're fans of hers, kind of thing. And they wrote me and said, could she perform at our event? Well, as luck would have it, she's going to be out of town that very weekend. So what I did was I right away pulled up the mental Rolodex and I wrote them back and I said, well, she's not available that weekend, but I can get you so-and-so, and gave a link to that performer's website. And this was someone who had been on my podcast. And I thought, now what artist out there is going to turn down a gig, and who's going to write me back and say, hey, wait a minute, fella, I was on your show, but you can't go booking me. They'll take all the work they can get. So just because of my podcast, I didn't have to miss out on that booking. And so now that kind of opens up something new where maybe this company in the future, because they did say, well, we really like your client so much that in the future we will come back and ask for her for something else. So I like that there's going to be another opportunity for her, even though she missed out on the first one, but that I was still able to fill this void that they needed at that specific time. And then there's really cool things that happen, again, that wouldn't happen for me if I didn't have a podcast. I've been invited to go out to NAMM in Anaheim next month. That's the National Association of Music Merchants. It's an enormous event, 100,000 people over the course of 4 days, and they have 1,600 exhibitors there. And Tascam has invited me to come and do my podcast from their booth.
That's exciting. So what does it stand for?
National Association of Music Merchants. It's enormous. It's a huge event. So I'll be there next month, and then in Orlando in February, I'll be at Podfest, which again, these are just doors that are opening because of my show. And then I've applied to be a speaker at CD Baby's Do It Yourself Music Conference next August in Nashville. Hopefully they'll choose me, but I know that that's really based on what I do with my business. But I know that having the leverage of the podcast will certainly add some muscle to my application too. And I'm even putting together a presentation that I plan to submit to the folks that put together Podcast Movement with the hopes of being a speaker at that event too.
Well, it's time goes so fast. I can't believe this year is almost over. But we say that every year, and just like you, when you first start out with the podcast or with anything that you do, it may seem like there's so much work to do. It's going to take you so long to build up the following. But before you know it, years had passed. Like you said, now you're hitting number 150, episodes. So just putting in the time, eventually, you build up the following.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really a mirror of what I preach in my business to these performers that, as we said, and now we're coming full circle at the start of the conversation, like Mike Delguidice, that if you're willing to put in the time,
Right.
if you understand that it's not going to happen overnight and you get the reps, then eventually you'll start to see some success. And for me, putting in all this time with my podcast and now being in 124 countries and getting invited by Tascam, we want you to come and do your show from our booth at this show in Anaheim in January. You really start to see the fruits of your labor.
And you can
Exactly.
be up and running for just a few $100s. You get a microphone, computer, basic audio equipment, Skype. You don't need a radio station to start a podcast either. You can start a podcast for under $300-400, and really the bulk of that is just the microphone and so maybe an audio mixer or something if
And
you're doing an
don't a
interview.
lot of the laptops have all of that already
Probably.
integrated into it? I mean, for a
Probably.
beginner to get started, and then
Yeah, I mean, you get a basic. If you want to get a good mic though that has good sound and everything, you want to invest in that, because that's a complaint with a lot of podcasts is that they
can't
use
hear
low
them.
quality. They use low quality equipment and everything. But if you get a good quality microphone with good sound, you definitely will attract more listeners.
But then you have to have good content. Don't
And good
forget that.
content.
absolutely.
and good content.
You can have the best equipment in the world, but if you're talking about a whole bunch of nonsense, then people are going to tune out pretty quickly.
Right.
Oh, a good discussion, Bruce Wawrzyniak. Real quick, your podcast available on iTunes. We're at
iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, and start at NHTE.net, and there will be icons that you can click on to go to those, or you can just listen right there.
all right. Bruce Wawrzyniak, founder and president of Now Hear This Entertainment. Learn more nowhearthis.biz. You've been listening to That Business Show with Jamie and Kelly, where business becomes show business.